So I'm here with Professor Jason Shachat. Jason is a professor of experimental economics at Durham University. He has held positions previously at the University of California, San Diego, Xiamen University, the National University of Singapore, and at IBM Research. He received his PhD at the University of Arizona in 1996 for work conducted at ESL. So thanks for sitting and talking to me, Jason.
Yeah, it's an honor.
So let me start off just asking you about when you were here at ESL. During what years were you a student here at ESL?
I was a student here from 1991 to 1996. I was involved right from the first day. I mean, my first day on campus, yeah.
So that was an important period in the development of experimental economics that you grew a lot during that time. You were here during the setting up of the new lab that we use now in McClelland Hall, when ESL moved from its previous location. So how did the new lab compare to the previous location where ESL was housed?
Well, it was a dramatic improvement. The old lab, the original lab, was in the old economics building, 110, right next to Old Main on the main part of campus. And then I remember we all moved, and graduate students finally got offices, or Carol's at least, in the new business school that opened at the same time. In the basement level, they opened the new lab, the new current location of ESL. The old lab was much smaller and older. It was probably less than 1/3 the size, but it had the really important sort of what I think is the really important design, where they had the separate control room from the subject labs. But the subject terminals, the old terminals, the terminals in the old lab were actually in these kind of face-to-face kind of Carol directions, and it was very difficult to control from a methodological point of view, being able to control the public information or private information, which is a really important thing and important element in many experiments. Where this was, they had the screen on the projector would be off to the side, and everyone would have to look this way to do it. Yeah. So when we saw the new lab, we were quite shocked at how it was totally state of the art, and in terms of the machinery that we had, the hardware we had, the software, just sort of the physical layout, and the furniture was just nothing like we'd seen before. And it had it had some really important improvements, not just in terms of we had these two wrist machines, we had this sort of the more important sort of all the latest computers, but also in terms of the layout, that now we had gone to this kind of more sort of stadium arrangement. We had the two display screens, so we really were able to control things much more. We also had the advent of sort of at the front of the room, we had the podium, so people could get up and sort of talk. The experimenter or whoever was sort of delivering instructions and things like this could do that. The control room was behind, which was really important and very spacious. And so this all made made it much easier to sort of control the flows of information and subjects, foot traffic, etc. as well. Sort of another sort of thing was that we had a separate room that you entered into that you could use for a holding room, but more importantly, it gave us a place where we could really maintain the privacy sort of precept in paying people individually in private, and this was sort of really quite important. In terms of not just running experiments, it was sort of some really big improvements too, in the sense that now we actually had we had plenty of room to actually have the lab manager at that time, Sean Lemaster, and the sort of chief software developer who developed all the we didn't have Z-Tree, we had, they were developing all the C++ libraries, we were developing everything, and then Jonathan was in there, and it really actually created this very important kind of, facilitated this important work dynamic where the graduate students could be in the lab, in there working with these other research associates and the software developers to help us get things produced much quicker. And we then developed a culture of just being able to learn by watching when the professors would come down and run the experiments, we were able to really absorb that, do that social learning about how to do things properly.
I see. So I guess it was quite a bit different to get an experiment up and running in those days than it is now. Can you tell us a little bit about about getting an experiment up and running in those days, and how much more difficult it was then than now?
Sure. Well, there was Several differences. One was the just how do we actually develop the experimental interface, everything, when things were computerized, not done by hand, which we sometimes did, and we still do that, but now we use sort of the modal experiment is developed in this high level programming language, scripting language, Z-tree. Back then we didn't do that. We really sort of had this in-house software development that was mostly done like in C++. And like I was mentioning before, so when I showed up, I didn't know any programming, and I was thrown in the first day saying, okay, you're going to just program an experiment. And this is with Betsy and Vernon, this actually became like the $100 ultimatum game that they published. I think it was in the AER. So I had to go in there, and they developed it, and I had to basically learn all the specialized libraries for basically how they managed the communication, because the networking was quite new in that time, right? So we had to learn how they had whole libraries in the C++ about the networking, communication between clients and server, or client and monitor, all the sort of the graphics interfaces. They had the libraries. We had to learn all these things, and it took a much longer time to actually sit down and develop this.
Did you have a lot of failures, experiments that crashed?
Yes, right, yeah. Not sure if that is any different today, but but when things crash, we could just sort of solve the problem much quicker now. There we had to go through sort of much more sort of this kind of basic programming debugging and unravel what went wrong. The other big difference is how we actually recruited subjects. And in some ways, we've become, the field is kind of advanced, and we're much more cognizant of, and we know how important it is. Who else am I in the experiment with? And we know, and the types of experiments we do now, we're worried about sort of correlated choices and preferences and things like this. Back then, what we would do is we didn't have a sort of computerized database. What we would do is we'd have to go to classes. We would sort of schedule our sessions. We'd go to the big sections, hopefully. We hadn't used them up. First thing, you go to the big introductory to economics sessions or other business school sort of classes, and then you would have to first you have to ask the professor for, please let me have 5 minutes to sort of introduce the to come in, make some announcement, try to promote what it means to be in an experiment, how you make money can come, and etc. And then pass out sign-up sheets for each session. And then if you were trying to collect a large sample, this could be quite arduous. And then you would, of course, have to go back and basically manually check, make sure people weren't coming through twice, signed up twice, and all kinds of things. And we would have people's phone numbers, and I remember people not having enough people and dialing furiously on the phone. We didn't have mobile phones, of course, at the time either, and so we're almost using the well, we had push button phones at the time, but we're trying to track people down the night before, calling people, because not everyone really used email at that time, calling people, reminding them about their session tomorrow, really just doing it, sometimes calling twice, just really trying to make sure we had everybody show up, right? This was sort of so I forgot about all those difficulties. Yeah, so those were sort of two big differences then.
Yeah, can you tell me about the research projects you were involved with here at ESL?
Sure. Well, that was sort of one thing that was quite good, is that we were, wonderful about the environment here is you got sort of quite involved right away. Like I said, the first thing I did is I got put involved in the sort of, at that time, Betsy, Vernon, and Kevin and their co-authors were doing this series of these sort of influential studies on bargaining, and that gave birth to social preferences and things like this, or gave motivation for that sort of line of research. Another thing was actually my first published papers. I got started right away. Betsy Hoffman actually was my sort of first advisor, and when I showed up, this was and this was a great thing about the environment. And one thing I'm just very positive about my whole experience here is that right in the beginning, my first year, semester, Betsy said, okay, I'm going to hire me as an RA. And she said, okay, I have a project with Gary Leibkap where we look at, and they're economic historians and experimental economists. And so they were blending these sort of two surprisingly different fields. Well, they were looking at how did these what led to the formation of these sort of agricultural cooperatives, say in California, but they didn't form in Florida. And so they sort of told us about the institutional story that went behind it, but they were really quite interested in developing sort of a theoretical model and an experimental test of the principles behind that. But Betsy was great in the sense that she just sort of put us in a room, sort of said, this is the kind of research question I have. And amongst the sort of the handful of students and said, or RAs of hers, and said, okay, I want you guys to sort of brainstorm, come up with ideas, and develop a project. And sort of just point, and I really appreciate pointing me in the direction and encouraging me and just listening and giving me the opportunity to get involved, and really led to sort of what ended up being my second year paper, and ended up becoming a published paper in the Journal of Mathematical Psychology. So this was a great way to sort of, and I think at that time it was much less common for PhD students to actually, have publications when they went on the market. And so this was just an excellent opportunity to, in something a philosophy I still use today with my own PhD students. You really learn by doing. Is much more effective than sort of the case, reading papers and trying to sort of through a third-person perspective see what happens. Just getting in there and actually having to just have a problem to solve and going through all the different aspects. And that was the one thing that you learned about running experiments is you can't just be the theorist. You can't just be the econometrician. You have to sort of do all these different dimensions or different aspects of the research that's involved in experiments. And you have to be good, you have to know what's going on in all of them. So.
Did you realize at the time when you were at ESL that experimental economics was poised to become something really big, was poised to become a large field like it is today, with labs all over the world, a Nobel Prize having been awarded in the field, thousands of practitioners worldwide? Did you have a sense that this was kind of you were working at a stage in the field's development that it was on the cusp of a big boom?
Yeah, I didn't know at the time. I mean, I came really at the time. There was basically, the main centers. I don't want to slight anyone. There was work being done in different pockets around, but mainly you only had sort of big groups, really, sort of real groups of people at Arizona, Caltech, Pittsburgh, maybe maybe Indiana, and we really sort of, at the time, there was really only the one conference here in Tucson, which was, I think maybe at the time then there was maybe 4 parallel sessions, and now it's probably like 14, 15. It's unbelievable the scale it's become. And we didn't know. I showed up. We had the small lab, like I mentioned before. We had a very there was a very active group here, but we just didn't really have a sense that there was this was going to happen. I think when we moved to the ESL, then we saw the bigger lab. And this actually started to attract other people came here to use the facility. And we started to see other people not just coming to give seminars, but also to do research. And we could see that, over that time, it was true. There was sort of like a flower opening in the sense, the bud opening into a blooming in the sense that we could see other fields were, not all fields, but other fields were quite open to this. And we saw not just sort of the basic theory, but we started seeing other kinds of experiments being run as well. But no, I didn't. I didn't have a sense at that time,
So, can you tell me a bit about the workshops for graduate students that ESL ran, and still run, and are still ongoing at other institutions? But can you tell me about the workshops
Sure.
for graduate students that ESL ran and the impact of these workshops?
Yeah. So this would be my first actually in sort of sense that experimental was about to grow, not knowing the sort of how big that growth actually would be. So in my final year, or the summer before my final year, I remember Vernon and all the people sort of associated with ESL were very excited because they were going to run a workshop for graduate students from other places. And as I remember Vernon saying, we need to run this workshop for the poor, deprived Ivy League students who have no experimental economics course or access to a lab. And this actually was quite, I think this was actually a really important event in the development of our field. So I remember just seeing some of the people who are now very influential in our field, of that, my generation, came for and that's where I kind of met most of them for the first time. People like, Gary Charnas, Rachel Croson, David Lucking Riley, Ananish Chandori, many people. They came and they basically were here for a week. And I remember, they would just go and they would do the sort of at that time and still some of the classic experiments that, and then they would discuss them, much like we probably many of us run our own field courses in the sense of running them as this kind of case study approach. And it really influenced a lot of people. We can see that, even immediately after that first workshop, people like Rachel Croson came to visit for a term and was running experiments. Gary Charnas came and ran experiments here that were part of his dissertation. And more importantly is that we really kind of, it led to the formation of this network of these scholars, these young scholars, that we all kind of grown, we've kind of all matured, gone down our different career paths. But, but really they all, they all went into they all ended up writing, at least incorporating some elements of the experiments into their dissertations. They went into many more jobs, so that really created this sort of larger wave of sort of junior professors at the time that more, larger than any that probably had been. And I think this, and they all knew each other, and they all sort of had these very, and they all started collaborating and things like this. And I think that was actually a really, really important moment, And obviously, it was quite successful, and people believed in it, and it's still an ongoing event. Still an ongoing event.
So maybe you can give me a sense of what it was like to work with such a distinguished group. Were you sort of in awe of the more senior people around, or how was it like?
Well, so I think the information we have now is for graduates, what potential graduate students have now when they go to their PhD is so much. There's so much more information and clarity about what the profession is like and what you can expect, how things work, than we had back, when I was applying. I didn't really sort of know what the these things were, but I was extremely extremely impressed with just the as I got in, took the courses, and interacted with the people, the the incredible level of the intellectual power and achievement that the faculty had done at the time. I mean, it was an amazing group. We had with Vernon, Mark Isaac, Jim Cox, Betsy, and then all the other people, and other people who were just doing experiments sort of part time, like Stan Reynolds and Mark Walker, etc. And we just had a great, and the thing that was great is I wasn't so in awe because they were just so inclusive. They made you feel, as you said, they made you part of the research community, the research group right from day one, if you were interested. And then so they were really much always they always would have time to sort of sit and talk when you had problems, or if you were having difficulties, and if you were coming in, you hadn't really tried hard, they would send you away until you try hard and come back. But they were. It was fabulous. I mean, I just learned so much by just going to the seminars and just being able to work alongside and being included in those discussions and the analysis and the write-ups and everything in terms of at all these stages. And it was just amazing. It was just an amazing time, an amazing opportunity, and I feel kind of I dumb lucked into it, right? And so sometimes it's better to be lucky than smart, and so but I think the intellectual environment was just fantastic. And I had it was probably one of the most positive decisions I ever made in my life was to come here and be involved and to come here and get involved in the experimental economics program.
One last question, Jason.
Sure.
So ESL has always been a very active workplace, lots of experiments and research going on. But graduate students always like to kick back a bit. And, so can you tell me about what you did in those, when you were in the lab, but didn't feel like working at that moment?
Yeah.
And how people would kick back?
Well, obviously, one thing that was great about the lab was the fact that, especially the new lab, is that it gave us a space where many people who were doing experiments and working for the lab, we could sort of set up and work between when they were doing experiments, and that created this sort of social group opportunities, and things would sort of we don't work, as a graduate student you only work 12 hours a day, and but you're awake for 14, so 14, 16, so you have some time. But sometimes I would stay up more than that. I think some of the things that we did that were a lot of fun is at that time I think it was the early stages of sort of computer games and network games. And so I remember we had, at that time, there was this computer game, Doom. So, and this was where basically everyone was in this sort of virtual world running around, trying to kill each other and all kinds of things. And the lab was actually a great innovation in the sense that we had these two, we had the control room in the back, and then we had these sort of two very large separate kind of projection screens in the front. So we would play, of course, we would play many people together, but sometimes we would have a big showdown, right? And so we would have, two people would be sitting in the lab in the back room. We would drop the blinds, which was very important for double-blind experiment procedures, sort of one of those great advances at the time, close the blinds, and then we would project the perspective players' monitors onto the big screens. And everyone, so the two people would be there, and the other people would be in the main lab being able to watch this. And so it was quite, and we had a very loud sound system that would sort of go with it. So we really kind of, so the other people would be playing the back, other people could see when one guy would be sneaking up in the other, ready to, as we would say, frag him, is the, I think was the term. And the other people would be really quiet because they could see the guy was about to be ambushed, and then he'd get ambushed, and people would be like, yeah, oh, you got destroyed. But we really would, and we spent way too many hours for this. I'm not too proud to say that I probably would have graduated, I probably would have finished my thesis maybe a few months earlier, as we got heavily involved in doing these types of things, which, you know, was a wonderful externality of the lab for us graduate students. Positive or negative externality depends upon your perspective.
Thank you very much
Okay,
for
sure.
talking with us, Jason.
Okay, thank you for giving me the opportunity. It was a pleasure.